Now, before we dive into Neymar and Rooney, I want to talk about the World Cup briefly. I have officially taken my first prediction L as I predicted, Portugal to win. My prediction wasn't based on them being the best team though, but the best storyline. And as we know in tournament football, the best team doesn't always win. It's safe to say that Portugal did disappoint us all. So let's talk about it. I've listened to people criticize them heavily, Ronaldo slander, Bruno slander, Martinez slander. And while they did underperform, I do think the slander and critique is misguided and a little bit harsh. So I'm going to offer a perspective that I'm yet to hear, right? Because I think people have simplified it. Bruno is overrated. Ronaldo, the game's gone. It's a little bit more complicated. When we first saw the composition of Portugal's midfield, many of us saw the best midfield in the tournament. Not individually, not individual ability. You could definitely find better individuals across the tournament. But in terms of balance, we collectively agreed that Portugal had what looked like the most balanced midfield two in two versatile eights, Neves and Vitinha, and Bruno, a 10. It looked good. But what actually happened? Well, from game one, I saw a microcosm of a larger problem that exists in football today. I saw the repercussions of overcoaching and how over-systematic football has become. What do I mean by this? Across the tournament, you can see examples of players who come from systems so structured that when the system is removed, they find it harder to operate or, almost end up in no man's land. I see it a lot with Pep City era, and I have seen it for years. A good example is Nico O'Reilly. First game of the tournament was playing left back for England like he plays left back for City, inverting, taking up spaces as an attacking midfielder would. But England might not necessarily need him to be that kind of left back. England needs a left back that's going to be disciplined and defend. He's good though, so he found a middle ground and got there eventually, but his initial instinct was to do exactly what he does week in, week out. Foden has often been a victim of this too. At times, I sympathize with the struggle. Week in, week out, he plays in a system so organized where he knows where they're supposed to be and what their role is. Pep's system is often an illusion of freedom because the players don't actually move, but the ball does, given the illusion of fluidity. Whereas Arteta's system for a long time has been the opposite. Players move more than the ball. City's structure is more rigid than it looks. It ultimately is the same structure that has conditioned Haaland to be prolific with such minimal involvement. But the tournament, Haaland had what is imperative in systems like Pep's: service. The 2020 Euros were a great example. Foden went full Gaza, was touted to be England's 10. But come tournament time, they concluded he went missing. Now, it's two sides to that coin. While he didn't feature much after the first few games and did feel like he went missing when he did play, he also wasn't being fed in spaces necessary to be the 10/playmaker we knew he could. And England has had this problem for a long time. The deep-lying midfielders are just not that way inclined, and it has often been to England's detriment. But Foden, week in, week out, can take up spaces anywhere in the pockets between the opponent's midfield and defensive line, knowing the ball will come if he's patient enough and keeps moving within his designated zones. It becomes frustrating when it doesn't happen. And the second side of that coin is, though you're good enough to flip the script of the one being written if it isn't working. And a great example of that is Jude Bellingham. What a tournament he is having, man. I truly believe people don't really watch him in La Liga. Jude's first El Clasico told me everything I needed to know. What is interesting is seeing people compare him to Pedri and reducing it to a this or that conversation. I think there is supposed to be a world where both type of midfielders are great in different ways. The first El Clasico Jude played in, they both played fantastic. Pedri tried to control the game, Jude put tackles on him and disrupted his flow but couldn't stop him completely because he's also that good. It was two players battling it out the best way they knew how. And on that day, Jude decided the game with a brace to secure a 2-1 win. Two phenomenal goals. Look, I am a fan of both Pedri and Jude, but what I won't do is be drawn into a this or that conversation about what a midfielder should look like or what is better. I grew up in a time where Gerrard and Pirlo were both considered to be world class. But we're going to come back to this later on and you'll see why soon. Fast forward to England versus France in the 2022 World Cup semi-finals. I remember that game vividly. England, again, struggled to find Jude in more advanced spaces. So what did Jude do? Drop to the halfway line to get the ball. Why? Because beyond just being a mentality monster who refuses to be left out, week in, week out, Jude played in a Dortmund system and eventually a Madrid system that promoted freedom. His role at Dortmund was that of a deeper midfielder than the one at Madrid, where he played more advanced. But his conditioning as an all-around midfielder gives him an instinct and muscle that is exercised in the system he plays in, week out. Foden, however, doesn't have that same instinct, being that he's more of an attacker naturally, nor does he exercise or build this muscle in the system he plays in for City, being that it's more rigid than meets the eye. You could say the luxury of having dictators like Rodri, Bonano, KDB throughout his career has spoiled him over the years. The ball would always find him. Now, what does this have to do with Portugal? Everything. I saw a clash of philosophies. I saw egos that refuse to concede and submit. Vitinha and Neves have played in arguably the best team system for the past 3 or so years. Vitinha 3, Neves 2. Multiple UCL titles, dominating Europe. And I would argue I saw both of them play with an arrogance that was counterproductive. Vitinha and Neves have operated without a number 10 for so long, it was clear from the first game they either felt like they don't need one or are so used to not having one. In front of Vitinha and Neves week in, week out is Cava, Doué, Dembele, Barcola, Mbappe at one point. Forwards who are so prolific they create their own chances and don't necessarily need a 10 to create chances for them. They're self-sufficient. And the third midfielder alongside them ranges from Ruiz to Zaire Emery. Again, similar ilk midfielders with no true playmaker. Bruno, however, because of his creative spark in season at United, was elected 10 for Portugal. Now, having a 10 in your system is like having a spoiled child or baby. They have to be made to feel important. You have to feed them. You have to stroke their ego. You see, you have to make them feel appreciated in order to get the best out of them. And as good as Vitinha and Neves are, without that piece, their midfield just doesn't work. And Neves and Vitinha either refused or just couldn't do it. It's one of the two. And I would like to believe that they're too talented to not be able to do it. Because if not, we have to now question whether you're a great player who can do it anywhere or just a really good player benefiting from playing in a great system. Now, there's nothing wrong with the latter. There really isn't. But it is an important distinction that we have to make so we know who you are. But here, Portugal is not PSG. Portugal is not Man United. And the systems you play in, week out, need to be left behind once you put on your international shirt. International football should be a beautiful break from monotony where you get to retire your tactical discipline for a few weeks or months and be free. If you're lucky, you get to showcase aspects of your game you might not get to show for your club. You get to be someone else for a few. And to be a professional football player, international football should feel like five-a-side or cage football when you're surrounded by ballers. But instead, I saw Vitinha and Neves in PSG shirts for Portugal. Times Diaz told them, stop sitting so deep and push up, but old habits die hard. Watching the Spain game, there were times where the ball was in the middle third of the pitch, Spain had possession right or left side, and Portugal's midfield three were not within 15 or 20 yards of each other. Off the ball. Vitinha and Neves were side by side in a 2, but Bruno was so far out the scope. I couldn't see a triangle defensively and barely saw one when they had the ball, which is absurd against arguably the best footballing passing nation in the world. You know, defensively, they dropped into a flat 3 at times, right? But there was no midfield unit defensively taking shape at times. And the basics of defending, the first rule off the ball is shape. Once we've defensively found our shape, we can assess and move accordingly, right? When they got the ball, similarly, you know, the same thing. Neves and Vitinha, sure, always within 10 yards. But too many times, Bruno was nowhere near them. And the flip side is, in the moments in games where things did look like they were actually going to happen, it was when the three of them actually were in proximity and quite closely connected, right? And listen, I believe Portugal underperformed because their midfield unit failed to figure it out. At times I thought maybe Bruno's tactically been told to stick closer to Ronaldo, which made sense, right? I saw him take up positions higher up the field, and at times it looked tactically like a 4-2-4, which we've seen United do at times this past season. But if that's the case, it was up to Vitinha and Neves again to find them and bring them into the game, and that didn't happen. We saw Portugal find more success playing out wide than through the middle, which to me was already an issue with that much quality occupying central spaces. Bruno started to drift left because when nothing is working, you go back to the things that work for you. I saw him attempt to play first-time passes over the top on the left flank that led to goals like the assist he gave Cunha against Villa during the season. But in this tournament, to no avail. Where I think the criticism is quite harsh on Bruno is that playing in that role, the 10, the playmaker, is about rhythm and reps. And without the reps or rhythm, when you do get the ball and it doesn't work, you look like a bad player. And this is where people crucified him. But in any game where Bruno has been successful creating opportunities, he didn't have a 100% hit rate. He tried 10 times and succeeded once or twice. He failed twice as much as he succeeded, but he was given enough chances to succeed. But throughout this tournament, he wasn't really given a chance in this Portugal system or ever really brought into the game. There was a few opportunities you saw him almost shy away from attempting to play the passes he would comfortably execute in a United shirt. But again, people killed him straight away. Now, I'm not defending it, but sometimes players have to buy their way into games. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes before you can execute the big things that come with all the glory, you have to get the basics right to build the confidence, the rhythm, the reps that we're talking about. And when the basics aren't going right, attempting the grandiose goes out the window, consciously and subconsciously. But that's where Bruno has to have enough experience and quality to flip the script. If the current way wasn't working and he wasn't getting enough service, flip the script. Shout out to Mike. Flip the script is something he's instilled in his Central Park team and it's stuck with me, right? But Bruno hasn't just been a good player for United. No, he's also been a leader. And with the amount of experience he possesses, his greatest criticism in performance, I believe, was more about the lack of leadership he showed in that Portugal midfield. Then you got CR7 who was crucified. And again, there's two sides to that coin. While he didn't offer much dynamically by way of linking up play or off the ball defensively, he's also earned the right to focus solely on scoring. Great players forfeit the parts of the game they don't want to do. And that has always and will be the case. Messi averaged 6.6 kilometers a game and people's reaction was, wow, he's so great. He runs so little and decides game. You know what that 6.6 told me? The other 9 outfield men on the pitch are on the same page. We'd be foolish to assume the other players aren't covering the distances that he isn't. And that's why he's been able to be who he's been this tournament. That's why Pepe came out and said the players don't want to die for Ronaldo because the parts of the game that he doesn't want to do, they should be willing to do for him. And that's the price. When Haaland has 18 touches or less in a game and scores, we champion how intelligent of a striker he is. But because it didn't work for Ronaldo, he's selfish. The game's gone. It's beyond him. And for a while, I've tried to pin what has he lost physically? Because Ronaldo isn't slow. He's still incredibly sharp. Is it mobility? He can still jump, etc. But I think if he's lost anything with age, it's his agility. He can run straight, but zigzagging, it just ain't the same. But look, he's 41. Cut him some slack. But what I do believe, though, is that Ronaldo believed he had enough quality behind him in Bruno, the assist record holder of the Prem, and 2 times UCL back-to-back winners Vitinha and Neves, and enough explosiveness out wide between Neto, Leao, Felix, etc. for them to create opportunities for him to do what he does best, score. And I think every single one of us in Ronaldo's shoes would have believed the same. So it's not one issue or one player who can be blamed. It's a compounding effect of things that led to their underwhelming performance. But to me, the largest issue was the inability of their midfield three to concede their egos and work together. Because let's be honest, games are won and lost in midfield. That's where Martinez comes into it. Yes, his Belgium team flopped. But again, there's layers. KDB for Belgium, KDB for City, might be 2 different players. Again, Pep City players outside of his system. Belgium had egos issues too, right? KDB and Courtois' relationship. Listen, KDB and Courtois' situation is the kind of drama we saw on Dream Team when Luke Davenport signed. So many factors that have to be considered. But again, as a manager, you have a responsibility to get the best out of your players, and he didn't. We were supposed to see a Portugal midfield that exemplified love, that could find each other in the dark. We were supposed to see Vitinha and Neves bring Bruno to life so he could do what he's done all season. But we got the complete opposite. And as much as we isolate individual performances, it's very rare one individual performance is solely their own doing. It's typically more times than not a combination of things, especially in midfield. As harsh as it sounds, a 10 does not have a bad performance without the influence of his 6 or his 8s behind him. If the 10 is given an abundance of chances to create and fails to deliver, now we can address his individual performance. But if a 10 isn't even in the game, in a midfield 3, we have to address the performance of the midfield as a unit. And that goes beyond just Portugal. That's any team. Too many times I've seen 10s isolated in games with minimal service, holding the brunt when they were missing, they were bad, etc., without any real conversation surrounding the deeper midfielders' role that they played in the 10s isolation. England have done it for as long as I can remember. I actually think Felix Leao, Nuno Mendes, the back four, didn't really put too much of a foot wrong. And against Spain, Bernardo really did cost them the game. That might sound harsh, but Portugal actually held on long enough to where it actually felt like Spain was starting to run out of ideas until they made the substitutions. The tide was actually starting to turn. Portugal had grabbed the late winner in the previous round, so the longer the game went on, the more they were going to start believing. But Bernardo comes off the bench, and a silly yellow card within minutes, a silly foul to give away that led to the goal shortly after, and way too much experience to give a foul away in that kind of area, then not stand on it to stop a footballing nation like Spain from taking a quick free kick. This is tournament knockout football, and that's basic. You get taught that at a young age. You give away a free kick, you stand on it, and you ask the ref for a whistle. Who doesn't know that? Then, beyond not standing on it, chasing waterfalls defensively instead of standing the ball up in front of you and the ball getting popped around you in a triangle. Go watch it back. They put Bernardo in a rondo. Look, Diaz didn't step fast enough either, right? And that's the compounding effect, but it starts with Bernardo. But again, Bernardo in the first game wasn't convincing either. Another Pep system player, right, who never really convinced me in a Portugal shirt. Now, none of this means these aren't good players, and this is where the narratives get misguided and harsh. If anything, it means they're a little bit spoiled. It's like having a chef who cooks you breakfast every day and you go on vacation and act like you forgot how to make yourself an omelette. Despite how overcoached and overcooked the game has become though, there has been many positives. And this tournament, and you know, when it's all said and done, we might have to have a recap, because never in my life has the Golden Boot race been so incredible. R9 and close in 0-2, 4-5 goals, and that wasn't incredible at the time. But what's interesting is that the players who are having the most fun at this tournament are players who are actually being given the most freedom week in, week out for their club teams. Barring Haaland, who's taken his discipline from City to Norway. But that in itself deserves a conversation, because what City did was turn him into a more efficient number 9 who reduced his footprint on a football pitch to maximise his instinct and assets. This is also something a lot of football fans have a tough time differentiating. The difference between a football player's skill set and their tactical responsibility. People speak about Haaland like all he can do is score. He can't play football or doesn't possess a wide skill set. And that's false. Haaland's limited involvement is tactical, not ability, right? Haaland at Dortmund was dynamic, explosive. He often dropped as deep as the halfway line to engage in the game. He beat defenders one-on-one and carried the ball longer distances. And that is evidence. It's all the proof needed to let people know how he plays is tactical and not out of necessity. And that in itself is a discipline at the highest level. Speaking of Norway, something else that I have seen is a conversation surrounding Martin Odegaard, who I actually love. For the past 2 seasons, he's been on the receiving end of a lot of criticism at times. And I have told my close friends for the past few years, Odie is no longer a 10. I do believe Arteta's ideal midfield three would be Rice, Odie and Eze. But I think he was unsure about Rice in the 6 in his system, which is why he brought in Jorginho as a short-term solution and then Zubi and Norgard the following summer. And of course he had his reservations at times about Eze off the ball defensively, so he adjusted accordingly. But the tail end of the past season, Rice played 6 a few times, and to me, that was the most natural and comfortable I've seen him. Skelly was ahead of him in more games, which also worked nicely, but against Burnley, the last game of the season, it was Rice, Odie and Eze. It worked seamlessly because Rice offered a stability that no one else at Arsenal could in that pocket, and Rice recorded more forward passes than anybody in that game, which he gets killed for typically. But he made so many forward passes because he could always find Odie ahead of him, who was dropping in like he likes to do. Odie brought Eze into the game, and what you had was a midfield that was a balanced midfield unit. But Odie for Norway played in the double pivot the other day, and it set off alarm bells in people's minds, and I couldn't believe it took that long for people to see it. I have called him Arsenal's heartbeat for years. Odie has wanted to dictate play for a long time on and off the ball. He's sped play up, he's slowed it down, and he's been that player for Arsenal for a while. Despite Norway losing to England, he had an exceptional game for me. He was free to be exactly who he's wanted to be, and he played the game unrestricted. He was Norway's heartbeat, kept them ticking, and adjusted their rhythm, right? He really adjusted their rhythm when necessary. And he did this in a Norway team that was very disciplined and allowed England to have the ball most of the first half. I think it was quite a genius tactic from Norway, if you ask me. 30 degrees Celsius, which is about, 86, 90 Fahrenheit. And I'm not sure if they were playing on 100% grass, but if you've ever played on turf or synthetic grass in that kind of heat, you have to add about an extra 10 degrees to the heat. All right, and who wants 80% possession in that kind of heat? I think they tried to take some steam out of England early on, and it did work. Because when Norway started to buy their way into the game, they had some energy and reserves. But back to Odie. When played in the 10, Arsenal play in a system that doesn't necessarily feed the 10 in advanced pockets centrally between the lines. So Odie has a habit of dropping deeper to get the ball anyway. He also favours drifting to the right, where him and Saka create overloads with additional overlaps of Ben White, Timber, whoever plays at right back. But rarely would Odie sit centrally in between the opponent's midfield and defensive lines. But what I dislike is the narrative that he failed as a 10. Or people saying he was never a 10. No, yes, he was. He was a 10. A wonder kid at that too. He didn't fail as a 10. He's actually just maturing as a midfielder. Odie's descent deeper into midfield is a natural progression that all dictating midfielders take. Don't believe me? Let's look at the science. Like I always say, as much as we think there is an art, there is a science too. Pirlo ended his career deep lying centre midfielder, but started where? An attacking midfielder, a 10. Seedorf ended his career where? But started where? 10. Scholesy ended his career a deep lying midfielder, but burst onto the scene where? 10. Thiago Alcantara started a 10, but ended his career where? Veron, Toni Kroos, Luka Modric, Schweinsteiger, Ballack, Xavi Alonso himself, which is why he also understood and recognized as a manager at Leverkusen, Xhaka's nature, right? Because he also made the same transition, playing deeper for Arsenal, but Xavi used him more advanced because Xhaka also did the same. The great Xavi Hernandez, same transition. Cesc Fabregas, Santi Cazorla. My favourite of them all, Juan Roman Riquelme, who we will discuss later in the season. Even Mikel Arteta. The list is endless, right? But the natural maturation of a midfielder who prefers to dictate a game rather than kill it in a good way will always be deeper into midfield. While most of the midfielders I name enjoyed their creativity in their younger years, they were all players who thought the game through a certain way, and with age and maturation, they were always going to want more from the game because of how their brains work. Odie didn't fail in the 10. He is simply maturing. And the catch-22 of him playing in Arteta's system in the 10 is that it prepared him defensively for his descent. His work rate off the ball, his understanding of the press and being the one to start it up high has only conditioned him to be a better two-way player than he was initially. Odie didn't fail. He's growing up. And I've seen it for the past few seasons because there are always growing pains, and his form has definitely displayed that on top of his injury struggles, right? I think it's very important, though, he plays deeper for Arsenal next season. Because if Odie played in any top team today, Madrid, Barca, PSG, Bayern, he would play deeper in midfield and not in the 10. And my last point before we dive into the Neymar and Rooney is, I believe Kobbie Mainoo must do the same. Kobbie is currently where he will end his career. And in order for him to develop even more, Carrick should, and I actually do think Carrick will, use him more in more advanced positions next season. Kobbie, similarly to Scholesy early on for United, should operate at times as a second striker or 10 at times. Kobbie isn't a playmaker in the sense he's going to weave passes through on a string, but he has feet and the creativity to draw the game towards him that would then create opportunities for him to slip others in, forcing opponents to bite or being disrupted by his orbit that way. And being a playmaker is not one-dimensional. It doesn't always have to present itself like KDB or Bruno. And Kobbie has a lot of magic we haven't seen. And the reason we haven't seen it isn't because he's afraid or can't do it. He's shown glimpses. But it's because he understands very clearly that to play deeper requires a deeper discipline, a different discipline. And he's too young to be that disciplined just yet. He still needs to exercise his imagination more. And playing him in more advanced positions will help nurture that ability and aid him when he matures and makes his descent eventually. The examples I gave earlier were midfielders of old, but let's look at how Spain has nurtured their young midfield talent similar to Kobbie and Pedri and Gavi. Am I saying Kobbie's on their level or the same player? No. Even though I think so personally, but what you have to understand is profiles. Kobbie is a ball-playing midfielder, as are they. But anyway, Pedri now sits a lot deeper. But when he first broke into the team under Coleman and Xavi, he played left wing, typically inverted, but he was much more advanced, and he also played in the 10, eventually descending into the 8 we see today. Gavi similarly. We saw him play as a false 9, also on the wing too, before dropping deeper into midfield. I'm not saying start him over Bruno, etc. But United have to figure out a way that works to get him minutes in there so he can be exposed to those pressures. I could do a whole segment on Kobbie and the Amrin situation and why Amrin isn't actually to blame, but not today. Last observation before we dive in. Gyökeres and Isak in a 2 up front was amazing to see. I threw it in the group chat and said, I know Arteta's watching this with some ideas, because I don't believe a 3-5-2 has not crossed Arteta's mind. The link-up play between them, how much more of his game we were able to see in a 2 up top, was very telling. And shout out to OB Jazz on Instagram, part of the IRDers, who actually mentioned Isak and Gok in the 2 in my comments. I told you I'd shout you out, my guy. But we can't dive deeper, because today, Ronaldo and Neymar.